So recently I was in Japan, and actually by the time you're watching this video, I'm probably back in Japan. But while I was in Japan, me and my girlfriend, after we left our hotel, but before our flight, had a little bit of time to kill. So we decided, let's go to the Imperial Palace, but for the second time on that trip, we went to the Imperial Palace while it was closed. So I said, you know what, let's go to this place called Roppongi Hills. It's this legendarily beautiful mall. And so we did go to Roppongi, and it was as gorgeous as people had said. But this video is not about shopping malls in Tokyo, though I can make those videos if somebody's interested. This video is about something I found at Roppongi Mall. But since we were there in the month of January, what I had stumbled upon was a Togashi exhibition. Now, for those of you who don't know, Togashi is the legendary mangaka and my favorite mangaka who created Hunter x Hunter and Yu Yu Hakusho. And this Togashi exhibition was a dream come true for me, except for the fact that everything was in Japanese. And while I am currently learning how to read Japanese, at that time, I wasn't. So I got to see all the pretty pictures from Yu Yu Hakusho and Hunter x Hunter. Really, everything in the exhibit kind of went over my head. So while this was like traveling to my own personal Mecca, it was like traveling to Mecca without being able to read the Quran. So I ditzed around for a little bit, took a couple of photos, and left. It wasn't until after I left that I saw people started to translate what was going on these walls. And we got a lot of information from Togashi just in this one exhibition, both from Yu Yu Hakusho and Hunter x Hunter. I genuinely believe the most interesting reveal of all of it was the fact that we got a new way to grade Nen ability. You see, Togashi, for some reason, decided that a 1-month exhibition in Roppongi Mall was the perfect place to reveal some very important information about the Hunter x Hunter universe. Which is even weirder when you consider the fact that this exhibition was running parallel with basically the only time Hunter x Hunter hasn't been on hiatus for the past 4-ish years, with the last day of the exhibition being, I believe, February 2nd, and it's starting in early January. But what was this massive revelation for the Hunter x Hunter community? How does this new Nen power scaling system work? And more importantly than anything else, what does this new Nen scaling system tell us about the strongest Nen users in Hunter x Hunter? Well, I think it's an important caveat to get out of the way right now that this isn't the strongest Nen users list, as this system breaks up Nen users into their respective Nen affinities and tells you in 4 separate categories where every Nen user in this Nen affinity falls. But just because a Nen user falls into the ultimate category of their Nen affinity does not mean necessarily that they're one of the strongest Nen users in Hunter x Hunter. On top of that, a couple of key names were left out of this Nen scaling system, most notably Kurapika. So to sit back and say that this is a definitive list of the strongest Nen users in Hunter x Hunter is inaccurate. A more accurate synopsis is to say that this is a listing of Nen users who have reached the ultimate height of their particular Nen affinities. That is to say that they've achieved all that they could ever achieve in this particular Nen affinity. We got it? Good. Let's get into the video. But before we get to breaking down who's best in what Nen affinity, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. So like I've already stated, there are 7 people who fall into the ultimate category of their Nen affinity. But I haven't really told you how the power system works quite yet for you to understand what ultimate is. So let's open up explaining the new rules of this Nen system. Now the buckets that you can fall into are a bit confusing, because the first and technically lowest bucket is called skillful, while the second is referred to as excellent, the third is referred to as natural, and the fourth is referred to as ultimate. Now, could this be a weird mistranslation? Maybe, because as far as skillful, excellent, ultimate goes, I completely understand. But natural being the second highest for some reason kind of throws me for a loop. Like, I get what they're trying to say. You are so talented with Nen, it's natural to you. You don't have to use a significant amount of brain power or force to reach high levels of Nen usage. But still, something about it makes me upset. Now, these 4 buckets are represented with a circle. And the further you get to the center of the circle, the more skillful you are with Nen. Therefore, ironically, skillful would be on the outside, excellent would be the second to last circle, and then it would be natural, and in the middle would be ultimate. But once again, I'll reiterate that where you fall into these Nen buckets doesn't dictate whether or not your Nen ability is strong. And by strong, I mean offensive or defensive output. What we're measuring here is the skillfulness in the mastery of your Nen technique. And that's a big caveat when talking about this skill circle, as Nen is one of the most diverse power systems in all of anime. Nen can superpower abilities like Komogi's ability to adapt to board games and learn exponentially, always getting better. But at the same time, Nen can be used by an enhancer like Gon to achieve an adult form and reach insane amounts of physical power. Both are equal applications of Nen used by people with different Nen affinities to achieve separate things. So this graph gives us the ability to rate the ability of people like Komogi to adapt to non-physical combat means using Nen, comparatively to people who use Nen in a combat fashion. Now, Togashi felt as though it was important to note that it takes very little effort for somebody who is listed as a natural to drop down to to excellent or skillful, with the reason being, at least the one that Togashi gave, that if that person who was once marked as natural stops training in Nen, and thus the rust and separation from that training in Nen that they used to go through would put them in the skillful or excellent category. This is to say, to stay in that natural and or ultimate bucket, you have to continually train every single day, because if you're not at the peak of your Nen ability, then you're not a natural and you're not an ultimate. But since we're talking about ultimate, let's talk about ultimate. It has to do with what I just referenced. I'm sorry, it's not ultimate, it's extreme. I must have jumbled the words up. But the extreme bucket is represented by people who have achieved the highest level of Nen mastery in their Nen affinity that they can achieve. Therefore, being branded as, like, let's say an extreme enhancer doesn't necessarily mean that you are the strongest enhancer. I mean, it's usually a pretty good indicator, but it more means that you have achieved all of the power that you could ever achieve through training. But Togashi actually went so far as to say that training isn't the only thing that can factor into achieving an extreme state, as also things like chance and luck play into it. And on top of this, you're actually able to achieve extreme status in more than one Nen affinity. As another big part of this exhibition was Togashi saying that even though some people are born with a certain Nen affinity, sometimes they'll lean towards others as well. So Togashi stated that if somebody finds himself directly in the middle point of two Nen affinities, that by training in both of these Nen affinities simultaneously, that can be a way to achieve extreme. And there's a couple of other very specific, very confusing rules that even I don't understand, and that's the beauty of loving Togashi. But enough about the rules, let's talk about the characters who were listed on this chart. And mind you, it was far from every single character in Hunter x Hunter. The characters stop after the Chimera Ant arc, so there's none of the Zodiacs, there's nobody from the Succession War arc, and in total it's only about 20 or 25 people. So we're gonna go from the Nen affinities with the least amount of people in the extreme category to the most. Which brings us to our first category, manipulation. Now, the reason that manipulation is at the bottom of this list is because manipulation has nobody in the extreme category. And honestly, this kind of makes sense. As one of the rules that Togashi has laid out, and I have to read this verbatim, is in the 6 type chart, the training of abilities that are in a position where the type is inherently at a disadvantage to be learned may be the condition for awakening the extreme and has a complexity that cannot be judged unconditionally. Now, I've read that sentence about 45 times and I still barely understand it, but let me try and get to you my understanding. Basically, what the sentence is trying to say is that some Nen affinities unfortunately have the byproduct of being hard to train in, as manipulation usually involves manipulating other people, like Illumi's needle people, where an enhancer can work on their ko and their n and their ten in order to increase their strength, and a transmuter can change their aura into other things to train their transmutation. A manipulator can't really train unless there's people to manipulate, and thus manipulators are usually put in a situation where they're not able to train to the highest degree that they can achieve, unless of course they had thousands and thousands of people to manipulate over and over and over again. And therefore what Togashi is stating is that within the confines of Nen affinities like this, simply awakening a very powerful and complex ability could be one of the cases for achieving extreme. However, in complex situations like this, it's hard to unconditionally judge the power of that ability. Is what I think he's saying. And when you consider the 3 people in the manipulation category that were given, this theory starts to make a little bit more sense, because the 3 people that were given are Moral, Shiapoof, and Illumi. And when you look at the buckets that Moral, Shiapoof, and Illumi fell into, it appears as though the amount of combat, and therefore the amount of people they've been able to manipulate, or the amount of things they've been able to manipulate, really play into the buckets that they've been given. As Moral, who's considered one of the strongest Nen users in Hunter x Hunter, is only considered skillful, while Shiapoof and Illumi are considered natural. See, Moral's manipulation ability comes from his deep purple, his ability to manipulate his smoke that he makes from his pipe. Now, Moral can generate that into force fields or soldiers, but even as a professional hunter, his ability to use this frequently is significantly less than the amount of times than, let's say, Illumi uses needle people. And while this case doesn't necessarily apply to that of Shiapoof, if we harken back to the rule that we just talked about, Shiapoof's manipulation ability, that being Beelzebub, the ability to split his body into millions of little clones, is an insanely complex and powerful ability, one that I believe probably should have put him in the extreme bucket. But the problem is Shiapoof is only alive for what, 2 weeks? So Shiapoof is most likely placed in the natural category because of the complexity of his manipulation technique, but not in the genius category because he probably could have pushed that technique further if he had lived longer. And thus, manipulation has no extreme Nen user. Now, I know I said we're gonna go from the category with the least extreme to the most extreme, but there's a 3-way tie for one. So we're gonna go with the Nen ability directly next to manipulation Manipulation, Specialization. Now, the Specialization Nen affinity technically gave us a lot more than just telling us how strong certain specialist abilities are. Because while we did get 5 members of the Specialization Nen affinity and where they fall into their respective buckets, with Pakunoda being in last place with her Memory Bomb ability, which allows her to generate Nen bullets using either her memories or somebody else's memories and shoot them into other people's brains for instantaneous memory transfer. We got Neon coming in at Excellent, which is based around her Future Sight ability, which is the ability to write poems for people that will tell them what's happening in the next 4 weeks of their life. We got Neferpito and Crollo at Natural, with Pito's Dr. Blythe and Crollo's Skill Hunter. And here's the thing, I know what you're saying.
Nick, if Crollo is not in the extreme category, who is?
Well, that's kind of the most interesting thing. You see, because the only extreme Nen user we got in Specialization was Aulica, or probably more specifically Nanika. See, this is who I believe the hard to train in but incredibly powerful abilities rule was actually written for, Aulica and Nanika, because Aulica shares her body with an entity known as an eye, and that eye goes by the name of Nanika. Now, when Nanika comes out, she has the ability to grant anybody whatever wish they want. Now, obviously, there's a bunch of rules and caveats to this ability as long as your name isn't Killua. Most importantly, that you have to do 3 tasks for her, which vary in difficulty depending on whatever the last wish was, and if you don't do all of these tasks, not only do you die, but a certain amount of people who are closest to you also die. See, for a long time, people wondered whether or not this ability was in fact Nen. It was never confirmed nor denied if Nanika's wish-granting ability was Nen. We just kind of knew the rules and that in order to heal somebody, Nanika had to be touching them. And really the closest thing we ever got to a confirmation as to whether or not Aulica and Nanika were using Nen is that when they were healing Gon, a massive pyre of energy shot out of the building. But even then, people weren't sure if it was Nen. What Togashi has effectively done by saying that Aulica/Nanika is in the extreme category of Specialist Nen affinity is saying that Nanika's wish-granting ability is a Nen ability, which is crazy. That means simply with the power of Nen and a Specialist Nen affinity, you can accomplish anything. It's not some otherworldly ability. It's not some magic that only Nanika can use. It, like everything else in the world, runs through Nen. And that's kind of terrifying. It also means that Aulica/Nanika probably have somewhere near a limitless amount of Nen, because it confirms that that pyre of energy that shot out while she was healing Gon was all Nen, which is more Nen than we saw from the likes of Meruem or any of the royal guards. But honestly, I think Aulica being included as an extreme in the specialist category is really unfortunate for Crollo, because I think Crollo is probably as close to extreme as you can get. The real reason that I think Crollo isn't included in the extreme is because he's still improving Skill Hunter. And in reality, there's really no way to perfect Skill Hunter. See, Crollo has managed to do things like create a technique that allows him to put a bookmark in Skill Hunter that allows him to either close the book and keep one of his abilities or have the book open and use 2 abilities, which obviously is a massive improvement to Skill Hunter. But when you really sit down and think about it, the fact that Skill Hunter can always be added to really means that it's impossible to master, as there'll always be new techniques and new strategies that one can create using Skill Hunter. And I think that's really the beauty of this new Nen ranking system. It's not about how strong the ability is, it's about how well you can master it. As for Pito, I know I said earlier that it was Dr. Blythe. Actually, Dr. Blythe is Manipulation. Another cool thing that came out of this Specialist Nen affinity new little circle is that Togashi essentially confirmed that Terpsichore was in fact a Specialist Nen ability. Now, this technique creates a puppeteer that attaches strings to Pito, and these strings boost all of Pito's abilities and allow Pito to be controlled like a puppet at superhuman speeds. Now, the reason that you could say that this isn't a genius level ability is twofold. One, because Pito didn't have enough time to work with it and perfect it, and 2, because technically it got stronger after Pito's death, using post-mortem Nen, which would imply that Terpsichore wasn't perfected because there was a way to make it stronger through death. So maybe, just maybe, if post-death Pito was added onto this list, they would be in the extreme category. After Specialization, we have another one of the affinities that only had one extreme user, and that is Transmutation. Now this, I actually found arguably the most interesting out of any of the Nen affinities, except for maybe Specialization. Because in this category, we have Youpi, Hisoka, and Bisky. Of those 3, which do you think the extreme is? Is it Hisoka, the man who wants to kill every single member of the Phantom Troop and fought Crollo almost to a legitimate standstill? Is it Youpi, arguably the strongest royal guard who was able to go up against the likes of Killua and Godspeed and many other more powerful opponents? Or was it Bisky? If you guessed Biscuit Kruger, the woman I have a cosplay of, you would be correct. See, in this Nen affinity, both Youpi and Hisoka are considered naturals, one below extreme. Now, Transmutation is honestly a very wide umbrella when it comes to Nen affinities. Since Nen is kind of life force, you can transmute it into a whole lot of different things. Killua transmutes his Nen to have lightning-like properties, and he uses uses this transmuted Nen to increase his speed and reaction time. And Hisoka does something very similar, transmuting his Nen into bungee gum. But Bisky and Youpi do something kind of different with their Nen. See, instead of transmuting their Nen to work offensively or defensively for them, Bisky and Youpi use the transmutation of their Nen to change their bodies. Youpi has the ability Metamorphosis that allows him to grow wings or new eyes or more arms. But he also has the ability Rage Incarnate, which allows Youpi to control the rage in his body to manifest as power. Specifically power in the form of centaur legs and a scythe arm and a big blobby other arm. And in this form, Youpi is faster, can still shapeshift, has a scythe for an arm, and also no longer swells the more rage he feels, which eliminates things like his emission technique, Rage Blast. But much in the same way as all of the other royal guards, Youpi had only been alive for about 2 weeks, and therefore Youpi didn't have time to perfect things like Rage Incarnate. He didn't know how to tap into the power of rage and use it to make him stronger. Identifying Rage Incarnate as one of his abilities was actually an accident, so figuring out how to tap into that purposely and use it as an ability, and then mastering that ability probably would have put Youpi in the extreme bucket. And something similar could be said for Hisoka, who, while is incredibly talented with his bungee gum, being able to make what many would perceive as kind of a weak Nen ability one of the strongest in the show because of his insane intellect. We saw that in Hisoka's battle against Chrollo, he was still growing with his bungee gum. While yes, absolutely Hisoka can smoke 90% of people in the Hunter x Hunter verse with his bungee gum, Hisoka has the ability to adapt to new battles. Like we saw at the end of his battle against Chrollo, wrapping his heart and his lungs in bungee gum and allowing his postmortem Nen to revive him. Things like that are an improvement to bungee gum that Hisoka hadn't used previously. So being able to master practices like that would put Hisoka in the extreme category. So if Youpi and Hisoka aren't in the extreme category, why is Bisky? Well, once again, you're thinking about this the wrong way. Am I sitting here and telling you that Bisky is stronger than Hisoka or Youpi? No. What I'm saying, well, I guess what Togashi is saying, is that Bisky has mastered her technique. See, ironically, Bisky's transmutation technique doesn't make her big or strong or change her Nen into something elastic or electric. Bisky's transmutation technique makes her cute. See, Bisky's natural form is a hulking Goliath, about 7 feet tall and 350 pounds. She, in her true form, is one of the largest characters in Hunter x Hunter. However, over the years, by mastering her transmutation technique, she has allowed herself to change her body shape into that of a cute little girl. And therefore, instead of looking like the Hulk's big sister, she looks like an adorable little porcelain doll. And Bisky has mastered that. Bisky's application of her transmutation abilities have allowed her to perfectly encapsulate what she wants to encapsulate. And this isn't something that she can let up on, because the second that Bisky allows her transmutation abilities to slip, she would go back to her regular form. And thus Bisky has to stay on top of her own transmutation abilities to keep up her cute appearance. Is it what you want? Probably not. Does it make sense with what Togashi is trying to paint? Absolutely. After that, we'll get to the last Nen affinity with just one extreme user. That would be Conjuration. See, we were given 5 Nen users in the Conjuration category, first of which, and the lowest of which, was Shizuku, the member of the Phantom Troupe with Blinky, the vacuum. She was given the tag of Skillful, which once again is a sterling example of how this is not a representation of strength. Well, I would argue that Shizuku is far, and I mean far, from the strongest member of the Phantom Troupe. Being one of the weaker members of the Phantom Troupe still makes you one of the stronger people in the universe. This moniker of Skillful is more applied to Blinky, which implies that there's actually a lot of room for Blinky to grow as a conjured ability. And considering all the Nen restrictions placed on Blinky, this kind of makes sense. Blinky is able to suck up anything infinitely, unless of course it's either made of Nen or a human body, an alive human body. I think it can suck up dead human bodies. And it's these Nen restrictions that allow Blinky to suck up things like entire auction houses. But I think what Togashi is trying to say by placing Shizuku this low is that Blinky can be further evolved. That maybe down the line, it'll be able to suck up living human beings, or to be able to consume Nen generated objects. Or it's a possibility that Togashi is saying that Blinky isn't a good use of Shizuku's conjuration abilities, and that she is capable of training higher up in conjuration abilities with other conjuration abilities. Knuckle is the next entry on the list. Now, Knuckle has the ability to conjure a little debt counter, and this debt counter counts Nen. That is to say that after Knuckle makes contact with you and deals a certain amount of damage to you, but he doesn't actually damage you, he actually gives you Nen, that Nen starts to gain interest. And the more times Knuckle hits you and gives you more Nen, that increases your Nen counter, until eventually your Nen counter is higher than the amount of Nen that you currently have, at which point you go bankrupt and run out of Nen. Now, this ability is genius, and it is arguably better than Blinky, but Knuckle is still young, and there's a lot of work that could be done with this Nen counter. One of the biggest weaknesses of the Nen counter as it stands is that Knuckle has to stay close to whoever he punches. And if Knuckle doesn't stay close, then the Nen counter stays the same. So there's absolutely weaknesses with the Nen counter that Knuckle will be able to work on in order to perfect it, like increasing the speed at which it counts or increasing the distance he can have between him and the target. After Knuckle, we have Cortopi and Genthru. Cortopi is arguably the weakest member of the Phantom Troop, but his Conjuration ability is almost second to none. He has an ability called Gallery Fake, where when he places one of his hands on an object, he's able to make a perfect replica of it with the other hand. And he's able to do this with full-on buildings to the degree that he can make 50 full-on apartment buildings. And on top of that, all of these Gallery Fakes work as Cortopi's end, meaning that if you touch them or you carry these objects, he can track them. Now, I honestly don't know a lot of ways that Cortopi could improve this technique. I mean, I guess there's always more Gallery Fakes he could make, but that kind of seems like it. And I could say the same for Genthru, who has the ability to make Nen Beasts, but not like spiritual Nen Beasts like we have in the Succession battle arc, just like straight up Nen Beasts. And these Nen Beasts took the forms of gorillas, and they were actually incredibly useful in the volleyball bit of Greed Island. And really, the only way I could see Genthru improving these Nen Beasts is either making more of them or making them stronger. But honestly, the biggest surprise to me is the extreme category, as the only extreme conjurer we know is Abengane. I know for a fact you just asked,
Who is Abengane?
and that's because Abengane is the Nen Exorcist. And honestly, it being labeled as an extreme Nen ability is kind of surprising, but I think it falls into that very crucial rule that we listed earlier. See, in order to pull off this ability, Abengane needs to make a voodoo doll of sorts. He then needs to wrap this voodoo doll in leaves and twigs from the forest, because Abengane is a religious person, but he worships like tree spirits. He then needs to burn this effigy, which summons his Nen Beast. That Nen Beast is then able to exorcise any Nen that either be on him or somebody else. Now, the strength of the Nen exorcised by this Nen Beast determines how big the Nen Beast is. And this Nen Beast sticks on Abengane until either the user of the Nen that's being exorcised dies, or the conditions to exorcise the Nen are met by Abengane. So why is this an extreme conjuration ability? How is this different from Genthru? Well, if you sit back and you think about it, there's really no way to train in this ability. The rules are set, they're concrete. Abengane makes an effigy, burns the effigy, that summons a Nen Beast who's able to get rid of any Nen. Once the conditions to get rid of this Nen Beast are met, the Nen Beast disappears. There's really no way to alter it, and thus this conjuration ability can be classified as one that was created and therefore perfected the second that it was created, putting Abengane in the extreme class. One could argue that Abengane could find a way to shrink the Nen Beast, but considering the fact that the size of the Nen Beast is tied into the amount of Nen being consumed, I don't think that's a possibility. The fact that Abengane had perfected this ability already puts him in the extreme class. Fortunately, the next extremes we're going to talk about are not nearly as complicated, because the next Nen affinity we're going to talk about is Enhancement. See, this Enhancement category is very interesting to me, because it has a myriad of different types of enhancement. Coming in last place in skillful, we have Gon. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking,
Gon is quite literally the strongest enhancer we've ever seen.
Pito said in his adult form that he would be able to take on Marrowweb. How on earth is Gon only skillful? Well, that's because this list distinguishes between adult Gon and kid Gon. We're talking about adult Gon. And when we consider the power that adult Gon was able to harness, kid Gon seems skillful. After kid Gon, interestingly, we have two people that are the opposite sides of the spectrum when it comes to enhancement. We have Komogi and Uvagin. Now, Uvagin is obviously the significantly more straightforward situation. Uvagin is considered a natural, one step below extreme, which makes sense. Even though Uvagin was an insanely powerful enhancer, Uvagin stated that he wanted his straight right to have the power of a nuclear missile. Though when he was fighting against Kurapika, the power of his straight right only had the power of a small missile. And while that Big Bang strike is nothing to scoff at, the fact that Uvagin thought it could be as powerful as a nuclear missile implies to me that it wasn't maxed out in power. Now, Komogi is more interesting, because there's people that would argue that Komogi took her Nen ability as far as she could, being able to repeatedly beat Marrowweb in Go. But here's the thing about Komogi's Nen ability. Oh, I'm sorry, it's not Go, it's Gunji. Literally have the pieces tattooed on my forearm, should know that. But this enhancement technique that Komogi has is called Rapidly Evolving Gunji Playing Skills. And I think honestly the hint about why Komogi hasn't perfected this enhancement Nen ability lies in the title itself, Rapidly Evolving. See, Komogi can't perfect this ability, because this ability depends on the strength of the opponent she's facing, meaning that there's really no hard set limit to how strong she can get through this ability, so long as the person across from her on the Gunji table is pushing her. Now, there's two people that are listed as extreme in the enhancement category, and these two people are Adult Gon and Isaac Netero. And when you think about these two characters, of course they are. Netero is the prime example of somebody who trained their ability until it was perfected. Netero trained praying to punching thousands of times a day, until eventually he was able to do the motion faster than the human eye could pick up. And he did this for years, only ever stopping to sleep. Now, ironically, his hunter-type Guanyin Bada Shiva is kind of a combination of 3 different Nen affinities. It's manipulation, omission, and enhance. But I guess Togashi just wanted to give him the enhancement category. And even though Netero is the perfect example of what this new Nen category typing system is all about, Gon, ironically, is also what it's all about, but in a completely different way. See, the reason that Netero is considered to be extreme is because he trained his body to its absolute peak. Now, the reason that adult Gon is considered extreme is because he made a Nen vow asking for all the power he would ever have, implying that adult Gon is the strongest that Gon could or would ever be. And Gon, as an enhancer, and really only an enhancer,
What paper and scissors?
when does he use those? Was the strongest he would ever be in that adult form. And then lastly, after enhancement, we have omission. Omission, just like enhancement, has 2 extreme users, and 5 users listed in total, with the first of which at the bottom being Razor, which is kind of terrifying, because the way that Razor uses emission type Nen is his Aura Ball, an Aura Ball that he used to destroy Bobopo's head in one throw and destroy the boat that the Phantom Troop used to get to Greed Island. But when you think about how far emission can go, these Aura Balls really aren't all that strong, with similar techniques like the one that Silva uses, being able to kill Crollo and Zeno simultaneously. Now, am I saying that Razor has the ability to ascend to the heights of Silva Zoldyck? No. But Aura Balls as a concept have been used in stronger iterations, and therefore his Aura Balls are considered weak and therefore skillful. But since we're talking about Silva, next up at natural is Silva, and no. Now, if Razor being at skillful is scary, Silva being at natural is terrifying. Because like we already stated, Silva is able to create 2 massive explosive orbs. And Zeno Zoldyck, his father, was relatively certain that if hit with it, both he and Crollo would die. Mind you, those are 2 characters from the top 10 strongest characters in the Hunter x Hunter universe. So why isn't this technique mastered? Bigger explosion? We don't really know. That's basically the only thing I could think of for Silva to increase the power of this technique. But does Silva even want to increase the power of the technique? He is an assassin. He doesn't need to be wiping out cities with his explosive orbs. If it's strong enough to kill Crollo and his father with a direct hit, how much more do we need? Now, Nove being a part of this list is interesting because as far as I thought, he was a conjurer, but I guess hide and seek is an emission technique, which I guess kind of makes sense because he has to emit his Nen to keep the Nen dimension of the mansion where all of his portals lead to still there. I don't really know. I guess that's how it works. I always just thought he conjured the Nen dimension and conjured the portals, but according to Togashi, he is a natural level emitter. And really the only way I can think of him to improve this technique would either have the ability to throw portals, therefore he wouldn't have to be physically present to draw the circles, or to add more rooms to the mansion. I don't really know. Whatever, let's get to the extremes. Non-surprisingly, out of all of the Chimera ants, Meruem is in the extreme bucket, which I actually don't think he should be. See, according to this list, Meruem is an extreme level emitter, and the only emission technique that we know that he has is an Aura Blast. More specifically, it's Yuppie's Rage Blast, because Meruem has Aura Synthesis, which means that if he eats the flesh of a Nen user, he gets their Nen ability. And not only does he get their Nen ability, he usually gets an upgraded form of their Nen ability, like his ability Photon, which is an upgraded version of Poof's spiritual message. But as far as his emission abilities go, all we know is Rage Blast, which we know was strong enough to destroy an entire mountain. But calling him an extreme emitter to me is weird, because not only does that imply that he couldn't have made that Rage Blast any stronger, but that further Nen abilities he could have synthesized using his Aura Synthesis would never power up that Rage Blast. Like, assuming that Meruem could get access to a Nen ability that would increase his emission technique, there's no reason to believe that his Rage Blast couldn't be strong. It's weird, but it's also the mangaka. And also technically Meruem's dead, so I guess that is as strong as Rage Blast ever got, but that's not a reason to give somebody extreme. And then somewhat surprisingly, coming into our last spot, in the second extreme emitter on this list is Zeno Zoldyck. Now, I'm not saying that I'm surprised that Zeno Zoldyck is in the extreme bucket, but his main aura typing is Manipulator. That's how he's able to do Dragon Head and Dragon Lance. He manipulates his aura into the shape of a dragon. And ironically, the only real time we ever see Zeno use emission is during Dragon Dive and when he uses his Aura Blast. However, we also see him technically use a mission when he flies Netero and Meruem off to the place where they fight on top of his dragon. And considering the fact that the dragon drops him off kilometers away from the compound where the Chimera ants were living, this is an incredible emission feat. I mean, the entire time that Zeno was fighting against Chimera ants and controlling his dragon dive, he's also flying a dragon with Meruem and Netero kilometers away from his own body, which means that Zeno is able to control emission constructs further away than possibly anybody else in Hunter x Hunter, which is probably why he's in the extreme list. Not only is he able to control his incredibly powerful transmuted Nen through emission, but he's also able to do it from insane distances, which is probably something as an assassin that comes in very handy, and also probably something he's worked on for his very, very long life. And as the strongest living Zoldyck by themselves, obviously Killua and Aluka is a broken combo, it makes sense that he would be the one Zoldyck who caught the extreme label. And that's everybody, the 7 extreme users of Nen. What do you guys think about this new Nen Power System? Did you get to go to the Jagashi exhibition? Do you wish that you could have? Tell me in the comments below. And while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Also, shout out to Mythical Tenchi on Reddit. He was the person who translated the entire exhibit that allowed me to actually understand what was going on and make a video for you today. I'm gonna drop the link for the Reddit page where I got all the information in case you guys want to do some independent reading of your own. But yeah, shout out to Weebs all across the world speaking multiple languages.